Welcome to Highland League Weekly, the podcast from the Press and Journal. I'm Ryan Cryle. I'm joined this week by Callum Law and Paul Third as we discuss all of the action across the Breedon Highland League and associated competitions over Friday and Saturday. There wasn't much action, only two matches going ahead. We're going to start our discussion of the weekend's events with the Friday night game, which was the Evening Express Aberdeenshire Cup final between Formartine United and Aberdeen from Harlaw Park. Now, a very bad night weather-wise on Friday. I mean, I was scared my roof was going to blow off. So it was amazing that there was a cup final taking place not too far away from the city where I was. Callum, but a better game between Aberdeen and Formartine than we probably had any right to expect.
I think, given the conditions, both teams, you couldn't have fault their efforts, and they served up what turned out to be a really exciting final 2-2, and then obviously going to penalties. There's no question the wind, which was sort of blowing for the dressing room end down the way at Harlaw Park, had an impact. Like you saw Aberdeen hit it in the first half and get themselves a couple of goals ahead, and Formartine had it in the second half, come back to 2-2 and, had more of the sort of late pressure trying to win it. And, it was one of them where you had to sort of try and handle those conditions. I mean, there were points, it was maybe picking up at times and then dropping off a wee bit, but there were points where I was sitting there watching thinking, it's potentially borderline as to whether this can continue, but it did. And I mean, overall, it turned out to be, given the circumstances, a very good final.
The crowd and stuff, I mean, like, again, given the weather conditions, pretty good.
Yeah, very much so. There seemed to be a decent turnout, and people, I think, on paper beforehand as well, it was quite an exciting game. Formartine have been doing really well so far this season, and then Aberdeen, were quite a sort of exciting young time. A few sort of, couple of three first teamers in there with Peter Ambrose and Kjartansson and Mitchell Frame. So there was that sort of excitement about it, and it didn't disappoint. And ultimately, when it goes to penalties, it's always a chance for sort of somebody to be a hero, and that somebody was Rodrigo Vitols in the end.
Even a retake in the penalty shootout. Callum, was he off his line? He didn't seem to be too...
He was with the first one, aye. He would, if you watch that back, he does jump a bit early. And I did feel for Graham Rodger because, you've sort of had that reprieve, and then the same thing happens. And it was like him and Hamish Ritchie actually both. I mean, you saw Hamish Ritchie for Martin's equaliser, but they both had very good games, and then unfortunately they end up, not scoring in the shootout, and that probably takes the shine off what was good performances from them. And I think it's interesting, Aberdeen, first time they've won it since September 2004, and I mean, they haven't always played in it since then, but it's something where, in the past, they seem to have maybe struggled, when they've come up against the top Highland League sides in this competition or in the Aberdeenshire Shield, to find a way to win. But the sort of group of players that they've got this season have done that. I mean, they beat Fraserburgh in the first round, Brechin City in the quarters, Bucky in the semis, and Formartine in the final. So, come through four really tricky games to win it. And I think, bar Dylan Lobban and Rodrigo Vitols, out of like the younger players within that group, all the rest of them are sort of out on loan, whether it's Kelty or Elgin or Lossy, Bucky, Keith in the Highland League. And I think that'll probably, we've seen bits and pieces of them this season in the Highland League, and some of them have done well. And I think Friday's victory will probably give them an awful lot of confidence and belief going forward. On the flip side for Formartine, it's like you keep knocking on the door. It's like 7 finals now since our last trophy back in February 2019. And they're coming so close. And I mean, it was one of them. It's easy me saying this after, but if it had gone on another 5 minutes, the final, you probably would have fancied Formartine to win it, just because Aberdeen were having to weather quite a lot of pressure and balls into the box things, which they did well, to be fair to them. They saw out that last 20 minutes really well, to give them credit. But Formartine, they've come close again, and unfortunate. And it is, if they keep knocking on the door, it will eventually open, and they will get over the line in one of these finals.
Obviously, another difference this year with the Shire Cup and Aberdeen teams playing in it has been the fact that because of their new model-based development stuff, they've included more first-team players in their squads throughout the competition. What's the reaction in the Highland League about that? Because it's a slight difference, they're coming up against stronger Aberdeen sides.
Well, as you say, Ryan, I mean, three of the four, the Banks of D game, it was all just youngsters, but 3 of the 4 ties they've played, they've had various different first team players involved. I think overall, the reaction, it's kind of been, I think people have relished it, sort of getting to go up against better players or test yourself against those players, and it's also a sign that, they're treating they're treating the competition seriously and see maybe the benefit for certain players of playing in these games. So I think that's been kind of welcomed. I think there were a couple of things surrounding sort of Friday's final that I know Formartine kind of were a bit unhappy with. One was and Stuart Anderson touched on it, that it was on a Friday night. They'd sort of, when the arrangements were being made, had pushed for sort of a Saturday or a Sunday final, and his argument being that his players, Formartine's players were working during the day on Friday and Aberdeen's weren't, and whereas if it's a Saturday, then both teams sort of have the same preparation on the day. And the other thing which sort of caused quite a bit of chat amongst certain people before the game was there was suggestions that in the build-up Aberdeen had been allowed to or had been training on Harlaw Park, and that I should add, that's been sort of denied by the parties involved, but that was a suggestion. It's like, if that has happened again, if you're from Martin, you maybe look and go, is that really in the spirit of things? Probably not, but as I say, I don't know. That was one of the sort of bits of gossip that was doing the rounds before the game, but those sort of things, I think Formartine kind of left a wee bit of a sour taste in their mouth. But at the same time, people are within their rights to also turn around and say, in the grand scheme of how it played out, did that make a difference? And the answer, probably not. But I can understand both sides of it, where you say it doesn't make a difference, but I can also understand Formartine maybe feeling a bit disappointed with those couple of things. But at the end of the day, it was played on the Friday, and it was a cracking final, and the outcome was the outcome.
Okay, so as I said previously, there were only 2 games in the Highland League and associated competitions that were ahead at the weekend. There was 1 game in the league that took place on Saturday, beat the weather, despite all that wind. Down in Brechin at Glebe Park, the home side lost 1-0 to Fraserburgh. So, I mean, big result, this one, in terms of the league table. If you look at the league table now, it's looking really rosy for Fraserburgh, isn't it, Callum?
Well, it was, as Mark Cowie said afterwards, and I thought over the piece they handled the conditions better. Which isn't really unsurprising, seemed to like playing in the wind. I mean, they seem to relish that side of it, and maybe how you have to adapt to play in those kind of conditions. And I thought over the piece, the Broch posed the greater threat. Scott Barber was always, asking the question in behind with his runs. Sometimes he was, or quite a few times he was flagged offside, admittedly, which was I think his manager was pulling his hair out slightly at that at times, but he was always asking the question. Set pieces looked dangerous, and even towards the end, when Brechin were having to commit more bodies forwards on the counter with maybe a wee bit more composure or a better final pass or shot, they could have scored more on the break. So I thought they merited their victory, and it's like you look at defensively again, that's clean sheets they've kept the last 2 weeks, away at Broch in the Scottish Cup and then away at Brechin in the league, and it's like the back four of Will Sim at 16, and then the sort of old guard, Jamie Beagrie, Brian Hayne, Willie West, they were all excellent. And if you can keep clean sheets in games like that, you'll always give yourselves a great chance of winning, and that's exactly what Fraserburgh did.
They've obviously played a couple of games more, Paul, but are we feeling hopeful at this stage of the season?
There's a long way to go, but hopeful, I think that's a good word to use. That's how I would be feeling about it if I'm in the Fraserburgh camp. I mean, they had a really bad start. If you think about the heavy defeat they had at Huntly at the start of the season, was it
Forrest as well.
Forrest was a heavy one as well. So at that point, you're thinking, this is maybe going to be one of those seasons where the Broch leave themselves with too much to do, and it just kind of peters out. But the response has been excellent. They're probably the form team in the league at this point, which is taking them to the top of the table. I mean, Formartine are still going well. I think they're still the only unbeaten team in the division.
Have lost.
Oh, have
They
it?
lost to Banks.
Oh, of course, yeah. That's the recent one. Yeah, but they're Fraserburgh are up there. They're a hard team to shift. Nobody likes playing Fraserburgh, and when their tails are up, they're going to be difficult opposition for whoever they face. They're away to Banks this weekend. If they can come through that one, that's been an excellent start. As we've said many a season here, if you can beat the teams round about you, then you're in a really good position. And Fraserburgh seem to be doing that at the minute.
Looking, I was going to ask you about.
Well, I was going to say, it's like you're saying about them being the form team in the league. It's like us, eight wins on the bounce in all competitions, and out their last 10, 9 wins and a draw. So it's a big if, but if you can maintain that sort of consistency as long as possible, it gives you a chance. For Brechin, I think, like Ray McKinnon touched on it, it was, as I said, I didn't think they handled the conditions as well, and they got into decent areas without it. Like Andy Reid and Joe Barber between them have never really had a save to make in the game, and they just lacked that. Brechin, for me, just lacked that bit of sort of cutting edge or something different that was needed to open Fraserburgh up. And I mean, like, they started with their sort of two strikers as usual, and Grady McGrath was taken off at half time and sort of changed his shape. And then when Killian Sheridan gets himself sent off for dissent, which, really is just, for somebody so experienced as well, totally needless at that stage of the game where his team needed him, and he got sent off. And then they had to sort of change again, and they did have pressure as time ticked down, but you never really felt like they were going to sort of find a way, and that was how it proved. And for whatever reason, I mean, there's been various players, various managers there, but Fraserburgh seem to be the team that they really struggle against for whatever reason, Brechin, because since they come into the Highland League in 2021, across the league and the Highland League Cup, 10 games, there's been 6 Fraserburgh wins, 3 draws, and just 1 Brechin win. So whatever the reason is, it's hard to say, because, as I say, there's been various different players and managers, and they've tried different ways of playing against them, but the Broch just seem to have, at the moment, that ability to find a way to beat them. And I think, like, if it'd been a draw, but for whoever won or lost on Saturday, given that everyone else was out of action, I think if you lost, it was going to feel like a missed opportunity. In terms of you thinking, well, I know the other teams have got games in hand, but points on the board's always good. And I think for Brechin, you sort of felt if they'd won that, gone to the top of the league, and then you'd be speaking about them in sort of quite positive terms. But Fraserburgh, okay, are 2 ahead of Broch and Formartine, and Broch have 2 games in hand. Formartine have 1 game in hand, but they've put this good run together, and they've got the points on the board at the moment, and fair play to them. Although, as we've been speaking about as well, it's still very early in the season, but certainly you'd rather be up there than not.
Yep. Okay then, well, for those of you watching, let's have a look at the latest Highland League standings after that one game at the weekend. That's it then, all of the games, there weren't that many, discussed across the Highland League and associated competitions from Friday and Saturday. Just to let you know, you can watch highlights of both the Evening Express Aberdeenshire Cup final from Friday night and the Brechin City Fraserburgh Highland League game from Saturday over on the Press and Journal website. You have to be a subscriber to do so, but our full Highland League weekly show this week has highlights of both of those matches. We'll be back next week with discussion of hopefully a fuller card of Highland League action. Callum, Paul, thank you for joining me today. Till we're back with you, please keep up to date with everything Highland League and Highland League Weekly from the Press and Journal on social media, and enjoy the football, whichever games you're watching.